Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1947, Roswell Gray, Zeta Reticulans. To me, Grays and Zeta Reticulans can be very confusing. Are they actually the same species? To me, they seem a bit different. Grays are often described as advanced semi-organic androids, whereas Zeta Reticulans are said to seek physical missing parts to create a new hybrid of their own, which strongly indicates they are organic. The archetype of the Zeta Reticulan, commonly known as the Gray, stands as the undisputed icon of modern ufology. Characterized by their frail, lithe bodies, smooth gray skin, oversized pear-shaped heads, and massive wraparound black eyes, these entities dominate contemporary alien abduction lore. However, looking closely at how they entered human consciousness reveals a complex timeline that intertwines mid-century UFO flaps, famous abduction claims, and later retrospective tie-ins to legendary crashes like Roswell. The Roswell mythology, how 1947 got its Grays retroactively fitted. The association between the 1947 Roswell crash and the classic Gray alien archetype is one of the most powerful and enduring fusions in modern mythology. However, historical scrutiny reveals a stark gap between what actually happened in New Mexico in July 1947 and how the event was later reconstructed decades down the road. A deep dive into this retrospective retrofitting exposes the mechanics of how contemporary UFO folklore is built. If you pull up the actual newspaper archives, military communiques, and eyewitness statements from the first week of July 1947, the narrative looks radically different from today's cinematic versions of the event. On July 8, 1947, the Roswell Daily Record famously blazoned, "ROF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." This came straight from Base Public Information Officer Lieutenant Walter Haught's press release, authorized by Colonel William Blanchard. Within 24 hours, the military corrected the story, parading debris at Fort Worth Army Airfield that belonged to a top-secret Project Mogul balloon array designed to monitor Soviet atomic tests. In all the 1947 coverage, military briefings, and local reports, there was not a single mention of recovered spacecraft debris containing small humanoid bodies. Rancher Mac Brazel, who discovered the scatter field on the Foster Ranch, described strange foil, rubber strips, and sticks, not an intact hull, and certainly no alien pilots. The iconic image of tiny, gray-skinned, large-headed humanoids being pulled from a crashed saucer at Roswell did not exist in the public consciousness during the 1950s or 1960s. It was born out of a massive archival and investigative revival 30 years later. In the late 1970s, nuclear physicist and pioneering ufologist Stanton Friedman tracked down former intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel, one of the primary officers who handled the 1947 debris. Marcel's interviews sparked a renewed wave of investigation. As researchers like Friedman, Charles Berlitz, and William Moore fanned out across New Mexico to interview aging military veterans, a new layer of the story emerged. Witnesses began coming forward with tales of second-hand or decades-old memories regarding secret bodies, military cordons, and alien autopsies. By the late 1970s and 1980s, the Gray archetype was fully established in pop culture, cemented by Betty and Barney Hill's Zeta Reticuli abduction claims, the 1970s surge in contactee literature, and cinematic depictions like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. When 1947 witnesses or later informants recalled unusual military activity, coffin-like containers, or bizarre medical tents, contemporary pop culture templates of alien bodies were subconsciously or consciously mapped onto those hazy memories. Ultimately, the Roswell Gray is a retrospective creation. The historical event of July 1947 involved a classified espionage balloon crash and local confusion. The mythic event of the 1980s retrofitted that localized military mishap with an interplanetary narrative, cementing the Gray alien as the eternal co-star of the Roswell legend. For the first decade and a half of the modern UFO phenomenon, stretching from the 1947 Roswell flap through the 1950s contactee wave, the entities frequently described as small, hairless humanoids are Grays or cosmic vagrants with no fixed address. Observers and witnesses knew what they looked like, but nobody knew where they called home. That fundamental gap in the lore was filled entirely by a single watershed 1961 encounter and an amateur astronomer's painstaking detective work. A closer look at this history reveals how modern science fiction and ufology fuse together. On the night of September 19th to 20th, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a vacation in Montreal. As they traveled through the isolated White Mountains of New Hampshire, they noticed a bright, erratic light in the sky that seemed to follow their car before descending directly above them. Panic-stricken, Barney pulled the car over, grabbed his pistol, and watched through binoculars as several small, non-human figures peered at him from the windows of a silent, saucer-shaped craft. A series of rhythmic buzzing sounds then washed over them, and the couple experienced a terrifying gap of missing time. While the Hills initially suffered from severe anxiety, nightmares, and physiological symptoms in the months following, it wasn't until several years later, under rigorous hypnotic regression sessions conducted by prominent Boston psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon, that the full narrative of their abduction inside the craft was unlocked. During her hypnosis sessions, Betty Hill recalled interacting with the leader of the entities, often referred to in later lore as the leader or the examiner. When she asked where they came from, the entity allegedly presented a three-dimensional holographic map made of glowing points of light connected by lines, telling her it represented their trade routes and home star system. Under hypnosis, Betty was instructed to sketch this map from memory. For years, Betty Hill's sketch of the dotted star map remained a bizarre piece of personal testimony. That changed when an amateur astronomer, schoolteacher, and Mensa member named Marjorie Fish took up the challenge of decoding it. Beginning in 1969, Fish utilized the newly published 1969 Gliese catalog of nearby stars, which mapped stars within 22 parsecs of Earth. Working with yarn, beads, and a massive piece of plywood, she laboriously built a physical three-dimensional model of the local galactic neighborhood. Fish realized that to make the map work, she had to view the stars not from Earth's perspective, but from a specific vantage point out in space, matching the precise viewpoint Betty Hill claimed the entity had shown her. After testing numerous configurations, Fish claimed a definitive match. The prominent triangle and connecting lines on Betty's sketch aligned precisely with a binary star system known as Zeta Reticuli, specifically Zeta 1 and Zeta Reticuli, located approximately 39 light-years away in the southern constellation Reticulum. The publication of Marjorie Fish's analysis in trade magazines and books, such as John G. Fuller's best-selling 1974 book, The Interrupted Journey, sent shockwaves through the emerging UFO community. Up until this point, the entities in the Hill case were simply described as men or beings. Fish's astronomical triangulation gave the gray alien archetype a permanent celestial origin point. From the 1970s onward, whenever witnesses described being abducted by small, large-eyed humanoids, ufologists, and pop culture chroniclers automatically categorized them as Zeta Reticulans. By bridging a deeply personal, hypnotic abduction narrative with real astronomical star charts, the Hill case transformed the gray alien from an anonymous apparition into a specific interstellar neighbor, cementing a mythos that continues to dominate popular culture today. In the vast landscape of modern UFO lore, the purported motivations of the Zeta Reticulans represent a sharp departure from traditional science fiction tropes. Unlike the malevolent, world-destroying invaders of pulp cinema, alternative contactee literature and abduction narratives rarely frame the Greys as hostile conquerors. Instead, their alleged agenda is typically divided into two compelling, intertwined narratives: a desperate biological rescue mission and a clinical, cosmic stewardship. A deep dive into these core narratives reveals how modern mythmaking has conceptualized the role of the Zeta Reticulans in human history. One of the most persistent and detailed subnarratives within abduction lore, popularized through the decades by regression hypnotherapists, researchers like David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, and various contactee testimonies, centers on a profound biological crisis. According to these accounts, the Zeta Reticulans have either technologically evolved or genetically degraded to a point where they can no longer reproduce naturally through sexual means. Their bodies are described as heavily cloned, uniform, and lacking functional digestive or reproductive organs. In this framework, the Zetas are portrayed as a dying or stagnating race running out of time. To save their lineage, they allegedly conduct covert genetic harvesting programs, collecting human biological samples, ova, sperm, and tissue during abduction experiences. The ultimate goal of this clandestine genetic engineering is supposedly to splice human DNA with Zeta traits, creating a new viable hybrid race. These hybrids are envisioned as possessing the intellectual and technological coldness of the Zetas, combined with the emotional depth, vitality, and robust genetic adaptability of humanity. In some circles, abductees are even told that they are interacting with their own future descendants, who have traveled back in time to fix a genetic dead end. Conversely, a parallel school of thought within metaphysical and esoteric ufology views the Zetas less as biological refugees and more as detached high-level overseers acting under broader universal directives. In these accounts, the Greys are frequently described as biological worker drones or synthetic avatars, controlled by a higher intelligence. Their cold clinical demeanor during medical examinations is interpreted not as cruelty, but as the detached emotional baseline of a species operating on purely analytical, hive mind frequencies. Proponents of this view argue that the Zetas act as evolutionary gardeners or guardians. They monitor humanity's technological acceleration, particularly our development of atomic power, artificial intelligence, and ecological instability, to ensure we do not self-destruct before reaching cosmic maturity. Some contactees and esoteric authors assert that the presence of the Zetas is a catalyst designed to shock humanity out of its materialist slumber, forcing us to expand our worldview beyond our planetary borders and recognize that we are part of a larger galactic community. Whether viewed as a tragic race of genetic engineers desperately trying to clone their way back into survival, or as cosmic watchmen guiding humanity's evolutionary crucible, the narrative surrounding the Zeta Reticulans reflects deep human anxieties and hopes. They embody our fears of losing our biological humanity to technology, balanced against the hopeful desire that we are being watched over, corrected, and prepared for a larger cosmic destiny. Mainstream science and astronomy treat the narrative of Zeta Reticulans entirely as a cultural phenomenon rather than an empirical reality. Astronomers note that the Zeta Reticuli binary system consists of young stars unlikely to harbor ancient technological civilizations. And critics of hypnotic regression point out that recovered memories of alien abductions are deeply susceptible to cultural contamination, suggestion, and sleep paralysis. Nevertheless, whether viewed as psychological projections, folklore, or clandestine visitors from another star system, the Zeta Reticulans remain the definitive face of modern non-human intelligence, bridging mid-century pulp science fiction with enduring human anxieties about the future of our species. Zeta Reticulans, commonly known as Greys, are often depicted as small, gray-skinned extraterrestrial beings with large heads and black eyes. They are frequently associated with alien abduction stories and are believed to originate from the Zeta Reticuli star system, about 39 light-years from Earth. In modern UFO lore, Zeta Reticulans and Greys are almost always used interchangeably to describe the exact same entity, but historically and conceptually, they represent two different categories that fuse together. To break it down, the Greys are a physical description. This term refers to their appearance, small stature, gray or grayish-white skin, hairless bodies, large pear-shaped heads, and massive, wraparound black eyes. The Zeta Reticulans are a fictional claim to dress. As discussed earlier, this term was added to the lore later. Via the 1961 Betty and Barney Hill abduction case and Marjorie Fish's 1969 star map analysis to give the Greys a specific home star system, the binary star Zeta Reticuli. Are there other types of Greys? Within alternative ufology, researchers often subcategorize the Grey archetype into different types, suggesting they are not all a single monolithic species. Small Greys, the workers' drones. These are the classic 3 to 4 foot tall entities most commonly associated with abductions. They are often described as hive-minded, emotionless, and acting practically as biological robots or avatars controlled by a higher intelligence. Tall Greys, the overseers. Described as standing 7 to 8 feet tall with sharper facial features, these entities are allegedly the commanders or masters of the smaller Greys, frequently reported taking charge during complex abduction or contact scenarios. While Greys is the physical label and Zeta Reticulans is the geographic label assigned to them in pop culture, in everyday UFO discussions, they mean the same thing. The convergence of the physical descriptor Greys and the geographical label Zeta Reticulans birthed one of the most elaborate and pervasive mythologies of the late 20th century. Beyond simple alien encounter stories, the narrative evolved into a complex pseudo-biological and spiritual framework. A deep dive into the core mechanics of these reported interactions reveals a structured, albeit speculative, worldview regarding human evolution, genetics, and cosmic stewardship. The most frequent and distressing component of modern abduction literature centers on invasive biological procedures. Experiences across decades of regression therapy and independent reporting consistently describe sterile, glowing chambers aboard craft where they are immobilized. The alleged procedures focus heavily on reproductive and genetic material, extracting ova, sperm, skin samples, and neural tissue. In alternative lore, this is interpreted not as sadistic experimentation, but as a clinical, detached biotechnology operation, driven by biological desperation. Because the Zetas are frequently described as a cloned or genetically bottlenecked species, incapable of natural reproduction, humanity's robust, emotional, and adaptable DNA is treated as a vital genetic library. A fascinating paradox sits at the heart of the Zeta narrative. While the procedures sound violating and mechanical to the human experiencer, the ultimate stated or perceived goal is framed as mutually beneficial. By splicing human genetic traits into their lineages, the Greys allegedly hope to regain emotional depth, vitality, and natural regenerative capacity. Conversely, the resulting hybrid offspring are portrayed by contactees as the bridge to humanity's future. These hybrids are said to possess a unique blend of Zeta hyperintelligence, telepathic acuity, and technological mastery, paired with human emotional warmth and spiritual potential. In many contactee testimonies, abductees are shown these hybrid children and told they represent an evolutionary leap designed to usher Earth into a higher state of consciousness. Beyond the operating tables and test tubes, the Zeta Reticulans are frequently cast in the role of high-altitude cosmic managers. Within metaphysical ufology, it is often argued that the Zetas pay close attention to humanity's perilous technological adolescence, specifically our use of atomic energy and environmental destabilization. Proponents suggest that these entities act as silent guardians, occasionally intervening in subtle ways to prevent total planetary self-destruction, while carefully avoiding a blatant landing on the White House lawn that would disrupt humanity's free will. While these intricate narratives remain entirely outside the boundaries of mainstream empirical science, frequently categorized by psychologists as manifestations of sleep paralysis, cultural mythology, or stress-induced hallucinations, their impact on modern thought is undeniable. The Zeta Reticuli mythology serves as a mirror for contemporary anxieties, capturing our deepest fears about genetic engineering, the cold mechanization of society, and the hope that we are not alone as we navigate the uncertainties of our planet's future. Within the labyrinthine corridors of modern ufology, few questions provoke as much fierce debate as the true nature of the Greys. When researchers, experiencers, and theorists attempt to categorize these iconic entities, they invariably split into two distinct camps. Are we dealing with living, breathing biological creatures facing a desperate evolutionary crisis, or are we confronting sophisticated manufactured androids designed to operate as remote-controlled drones? Exploring this dichotomy reveals how modern lore has continually adapted to explain the cold, baffling behavior of humanity's most famous alleged visitors. When leaning into the classic Zeta Reticulan framing, ufologists view the entities as an actual carbon-based extraterrestrial species native to a distant star system. This perspective relies heavily on the biological imperative of survival. If the Greys were merely factory-made robots or inorganic machines, the exhaustive harvesting of human ova, sperm, and tissue, described in decades of abduction literature, would make little sense. The necessity for organic biological material implies a terminal genetic bottleneck. Proponents of this view point to recurring witness reports describing rudimentary digestive systems, clammy or leathery skin textures, and physiological responses to environmental stressors. In this framework, they are living beings, albeit ones heavily warped by millennia of relentless self-manipulation, cloning, and technological over-reliance. Conversely, a substantial segment of high-strangeness ufology and contactee literature argues that the Greys are not a naturally evolved race at all, but rather synthetic creations, organic androids or biomatches. According to this hypothesis, the entities encountered on abduction tables are essentially biological robot bodies grown in laboratories by a higher dimensional or non-physical intelligence. They serve as physical spacesuits or avatars, enabling non-local operators to interact with our dense three-dimensional reality. This theory neatly accounts for the uniform absence of individual personality, fear, empathy, or emotional expression that experiences routinely report. When interacting with an organic drone executing pre-programmed behavioral algorithms, one should hardly expect panic or warmth. It is simply carrying out a designated task. In many advanced contactee accounts, the Greys are cast as the ultimate middle management, workhorses built for technical execution and medical harvesting, while the true intelligence pulls the strings safely behind the cosmic curtain. This enduring duality helps explain why witnesses frequently walk away with profoundly conflicting impressions. One experiencer looks into a Grey's massive obsidian eyes and senses a deep, sorrowful, ancient biological consciousness, the quintessential Zeta Reticuli. Another describes an utterly cold, smooth, plastic-like automaton, entirely devoid of a soul. Ultimately, whether viewed as a dying organic species, trying to clone its way back into existence, or as manufactured biomachines exploring our dimension, both concepts mirror humanity's deepest contemporary anxieties. They capture our collective unease regarding the blurring lines between biology, cloning, and machine intelligence as we peer anxiously into our own technological future. Are Greys and Zeta Reticulans the exact same species, or do they simply look alike? One is frequently described as an advanced android, while the other is portrayed as an organic being closely tied to human genetic roots. What do you think? To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3. The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.